Welcome everyone to the April ACLS webinar. Today, we have with us the architect Thomas Roberts, and he's going to be speaking about integrating the design of social service programming into church buildings. And he'll be using a specific example. He is a colleague of Gilbert's, and so Gilbert is going to do a little bit more introduction. So take it away.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Tom, for your willingness to do this. Again, Tom and I are colleagues in the School of Architecture at the University of Detroit Mercy, where Tom also ran his practice out of an area just we consider it downriver that has been focused a lot on historic preservation work. And in that capacity, he's done projects for the Jesuits, namely our parish downtown, St. Peter and Paul's Church, which is 175 years old. And in its recent renovation, did a project along these lines about how do we integrate a homeless outreach program into the campus environment of the parish, and then linking that specifically to our call, our gospel social call. So Tom's practice started in 2009, recognized for his expertise in architecture and historic preservations, specializing in historic rehabilitation, restoration, building assessment and survey, and adaptive reuse projects. He has successfully consulted on numerous National Register and National Historic Landmark properties throughout Michigan. He was also named one of the Young Architects of Detroit and the Young Architects of Michigan early on in his career. He enjoys his work and has lectured on the historic preservation and design-related topics. Tom is passionate about our culturally and architecturally significant historic properties, and believes in the value of preserving our heritage while planning the future growth and development of our communities. So with that, I turn it over to Tom Roberts for some interesting projects related to integrating, again, our social gospel call, as well as our role as a congregation.
So the two projects, I'll give you a background on me real quick, but the two projects I'm going to specifically talk about today are St. Peter and Paul's Jesuit Church, which is downtown Detroit and is about to celebrate its 175th anniversary. And Loyola High School. Spent a little bit of time on that. It's a newer project, new construction, and it's quite interesting because it's a school for young African-American men in Detroit, and predominantly roughly 200 students, and it has a very interesting, both projects have a very interesting context. St. Peter and Paul is right downtown and is a very urban setting, where Loyola is based in a residential neighborhood, and but both serves a very similar purpose. As Gilbert mentioned, long career, probably somewhere in the 30 to 35 year range, depending on what experiences you incorporate or include in that. But it's been a very diverse portfolio. And although I've kind of specialized in adaptive reuse and historic preservation, all projects every building is fundamentally different, and therefore gives a diverse portfolio and perspective on all of the different projects that I participate in. My firm has been fairly successful in the types of projects we work on and the communities that we're engaged with. We've also been fairly successful at having long-term relationships and clients that typically are established with master plan projects and ultimately lead to successful completion and construction of a built work. And both St. Peter and Paul and Loyola have been clients of mine for 10 years for Loyola and 13 years for St. Peter and Paul. Again, here's just a snippet of the diversity of work I've accomplished. Quick history of St. Peter and Paul's. It's the oldest church building in the city of Detroit. It was built in 1948, and it was considered the cathedral of the city at that time. In 1877, the bishop gave St. Peter and Paul's to the Jesuits to initiate the University of Detroit downtown main campus. In subsequent years, the campus has moved to McNichols and out into the sort of the northwest side of Detroit, and that was in the 20s. And the purpose of the city, of the church, sort of changed its direction at the time. It was downtown based, and when things began to shift, it became more of a suburban participation in the church itself. St. Catherine's Chapel, which is an addition to the main church, was built in 1916, and that is the chapel that ultimately was converted for the warming center. Outreach to the poor has always been a part of the mission of St. Peter and Paul, and it was formalized as a part of their parish life in 1988. As we get into drawings and photographs, you'll see that this warming center existed for almost 20 years within the entry vestibules of the church, and a long 100+ foot long corridor that is approximately 10 feet wide that served the homeless for over 20 years. In 2011, I think this is where, as I previously mentioned, where many of my projects are initiated with a master plan. And in 2011, my office was hired to develop that master plan. And it didn't just deal with the warming center, it dealt with parish offices, it dealt with infrastructure, heating, cooling, things that have not been a part of the building for many, many years. And that the very first project was that infrastructure project where we introduced air conditioning into the building for the first time in the building's history. The warming center project was initiated in 2013, 2014. And in 2016, under leadership of Father Tim, was expanded to the Pope Francis Center and enabled a much larger and broader increase of the services provided. Sort of a contextual site analysis, site plan of downtown Detroit. As you can see, the center circle, at the heart of that is the campus of St. Peter and Paul, as well as the University of Detroit Mercy Law School. The various circles indicate 5-minute, 10-minute, and 20-minute walks. You can see the Detroit River to the south, and you can see the major north-south access of Woodward, Campus Martius, which is the heart of the city, and Grand Circus Park, which is the theater district and entertainment district with Tiger Stadium and Ford Field. And just north of I-75 now is Little Caesars Arena, which is the hockey for Detroit, hockey and basketball. And other major arteries are I-75 that runs just north of downtown. You have the Lodge Freeway, which is an east-north-south orientation, and 375, which is an artery that leads to downtown and heads in the north direction and links back into I-75. There is Gratiot, Grand River, and Michigan Avenue are the other main arteries. As you can see, this as part of this diagram, St. Peter and Paul is really sort of the epicenter, but its draw for the homeless population is really only 180 degrees since we're limited by the Detroit River. The campus itself has 3 major access points from an entry standpoint, and from a welcoming arrival. So you have the parish entry or the primary facade, which addresses Jefferson Avenue, which you can see in the top picture. The building to the right in this image is the University of Detroit Mercy Law School. St. Antoine Street is the side entry for St. Catherine's Chapel, which is also entry for the warming center. And within the courtyard, which is formed between the law school and St. Peter and Paul, off of Larned was the entry for the church and the handicap accessible entrance for the warming center. So not only were we dealing with the population, the homeless population, we were also dealing with students and faculty from the law school, as well as the parish members and their experience on parish members and staff for St. Peter and Paul's. I want to highlight those three dynamics, because if we start to look at the plan for the space, you'll understand how the sort of added to the complexity and how each of these various users are integrated into the consideration of how the space is accessible, and as well as how and when it is usable. This is sort of the overall first floor plan of the sanctuary, the church and sanctuary, and the lovely room, which was part of St. Catherine's Chapel. At the top of the page is this long 10-foot wide corridor that was the warming center, as well as the front entry vestibules. The parish offices were also located on the first floor in St. Catherine's Chapel. Sort of a front to back or longitudinal cross section through the church and St. Catherine's Chapel. So in this diagram, this was part of the master plan. And I mentioned, this is a side note, but integration of air conditioning into a building that is 170 years old, and to do it seamlessly so that the occupants aren't aware of it. We took advantage of this large attic space, the bell tower, and the basement, this very small basement that was below the church. In St. Catherine's Chapel, there's 3 levels. The first level, and this identifies where parish, as part of the master plan, the warming center was to be located on the first floor of St. Catherine's Chapel. The parish offices were being relocated to the second floor, and at the time, transitional housing was being considered for the third floor of St. Catherine's Chapel. And because of the plan that was developed, this transitional housing is under construction in a completely separate building that is off campus and in a different part of Detroit, that is really a result of the success of transitioning the St. Catherine's Chapel into the warming center that ultimately could serve the homeless population throughout the year. The 3 images are images of the entry vestibules and side main entry and side vestibules. It just simply, these became the space for housing, or for the homeless to gather early in the morning and sleep throughout the day. So you can see the mats were just placed, chairs in the main center vestibule, and that led into this long 10-foot corridor. And the only real break that every 20 feet, there was this small niche that at least gave some break along the corridor, but there was no natural light. The materials were just vinyl tile, dropped acoustic ceiling. Imagine there's no storage for any of the chairs or tables. And so on a very, very busy winter day, there could easily be 75 to 100 people just placed along one edge of this corridor. And it wasn't only just the entry point to St. Catherine's Chapel where the bathrooms and food facilities were, it was also the exit point. So there was really there was nothing, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. Celebratory about the experience. There was nothing warm or inviting. Next few images are just images of the St. Catherine's Chapel. This is the lovely room. You can, very monotone in color. I actually had to lighten these images up just to make them visible, but there was the natural light was very muted. The colors were all dark and gray. It's just not very honoring of the history of the space and the purpose of the space. And so this primarily functioned as the communal space for the parish. To the left in this, on the left image, was sort of a stopping point for the warming center component. And in the bottom right image, or the bottom image to the right, was where the services ended. And the kitchen was very small and not very functional. The bathroom facilities were, again, very, very poor condition. The spacing requirements and general accessibility were extremely poor. And really, there was just no, the spaces got built into existing space over time, and really was just a result of functionality versus any other consideration at the time. There were laundry facilities, but they were very poorly put together, and just everything just needed, imagine 20 years of everyday service by 50 to 70 people, the wear and tear, and it was not built to last and just took time. The kitchen space, again, it was just things that got built up over time, and most of the equipment and appliances were donated. Heating and cooling systems were just exposed. This was the altar originally as part of the chapel, and ultimately became the kitchen. But again, just the food prep is mixed with cleaning and as well as cooking. Several images of the balcony. The balcony, which was the choir loft originally, became home for the University of Detroit Mercy Law Clinics. And again, a very sort of a put together space with not a sense of privacy or separation between the uses. The balcony overlooking St. Catherine's Chapel below was just this folding partition, and no visual connection between the spaces. So the very first sketch I did for the warming center was a result of some visioning sessions with the clients. When I say clients, in this case, it was staff of the warming center, staff of the parish, and we actually interviewed guests or members of the homeless population to get their wish list of what they thought was appropriate for converting the space from a chapel, well, historically a chapel space, and eventually it became office space and social space, but into a space that accommodated all of those needs, but primarily functioned as the warming center for the homeless population. And something that's interesting, as you can see in this very first diagram I did, that it's a very traditional layout in terms of like bathrooms, sinks, and showers. And we called it sort of a locker room style. And we had this sketch when we first met with the homeless and staff of the warming center to kind of give brainstorming ideas. And one of the things that they really emphasized and highlighted is that the sense of privacy, the sense of decency, and the sense of their own personal space was important to them. And that the traditional model of kind of group showers, bathrooms, and locker facilities did not accommodate that need or respond to that need. And so as you'll see in the final plan of the warming center, we worked very, very hard to give that sense of ownership to their space, even though it was only temporary, that a bathroom was a bathroom, a shower was a shower, and a changing room was a changing room. And that gave each individual guest, as well as staff, a sense of ownership of that space for that very short period of time. And that became a very important component of the plan. And just to emphasize, this is the access between church access and warming center or lovely room access. Parish access is entered through the east entrance, which is this door, to an elevator that takes you up to the third floor, which is now where the parish offices have been relocated. So the final plan for the warming center, entry to, let me take a step back. One interesting aspect as well is the funding source for this project. The Ford UAW has always been a contributor to the warming center, and through various connections, invited members of Fordland and Ford UAW to just have an introductory conversation about potentially funding portions of the warming center project. And historically, when guests would arrive to meet with members of the parish or members of the staff of the parish, your arrival point would be in this location or in this location off of the courtyard. It's the more visible and less, at the time, the less obvious location for where the homeless would gather during the day. When the warming centers closed, the front entry stoop and porches became basically resting areas or nap locations. And typically they were covered with cardboard boxes, blankets, things that you would typically expect homeless to, carts with, their daily storage and so forth. And so from a public image, the front entry of this 170-year-old facility was really not particularly welcoming for the general public. And at the time, the preconceived idea that it would not be the right arrival point for people you're about to ask for $600,000 or $800,000 to contribute to this project. And luck, call it fate, call it whatever, those members of Ford UAW actually showed up at the front door, and they experienced the daily lives of the homeless, or the guests, I apologize, the guests, lounging, napping, having their storage on the front stoop or front entry steps, as well as their experience that the homeless or the guests would experience each and every day. So when the two members arrived, they basically got to experience what the guests experience on a daily basis, which is arrival at a front entry with a series of rubber mats laying on your marble floor, cold marble floor, and then your transition through this 10-foot wide, 110-foot long corridor to actually get to the point where you're into a space that is somewhat, again, these are preconceived ideas, somewhat presentable to what you would want your guests or executives, let's call them, to experience. And the truth is, we gave this presentation to them fairly spontaneously. On an afternoon, I was called and said, hey, can you come down tomorrow? Blah, blah, blah. And we gave this great long presentation, myself and two members of the St. Peter and Paul. The members from the executives from Ford UAW asked us to leave the room. They talked. We were invited back in maybe 10 minutes later. And they basically admitted to us that we did not even need to give, I'm getting emotional when I'm talking about this because I remember the day. The presentation to them on what we were planning to do for the space meant nothing. And the fact that they arrived and experienced what the guests experience on a daily basis for the past 20 years convinced them that this was a worthy cause. And so that ultimately set the ball in motion for the next year and a half to make this, to transition this lovely room into what has become the downtown warming center for now upwards of 100 people on a daily basis, and also a cooling center. So the whole infrastructure project that we did prior to this established the framework so that this could become fundamentally a 365-day-a-year operation, instead of just marginal days during the winter and not during the summer on any days. So again, as I re-show these pictures, imagine, being fairly high-ranking executives from Fordland, Ford UAW, in suits and ties, arriving, thinking you're at the great front door of St. Peter and Paul's, walking through that door and seeing mats on the floor, chairs gathered in the center entry vestibule, and then transitioning through this corridor. And at the time, there were members there were guests that were aligned in that corridor. They shook hands and met some of them. And for them, it's sort of like me revisiting it right now. It was a very emotional experience for them. So ultimately, what became the plan was entry to the church, entry for the guests got transitioned from the very front of the church to the side entry along St. Antoine Street. So it became personal to them. They were greeted at an office where they could get blankets, towels, supplies for the day, meaning toothbrushes, toothpaste, socks, etc. And then there was this welcoming corridor that had a nice multi-purpose room that could be used for meetings, could be for day sleeping if there was someone in need of a nap. So imagine all those blue tarps mats that were on the front entry vestibule. This space was lined with cots now, and not just purple mats on the floor. We had shower, bathroom and sink and changing, bathroom, sink and changing. So there's not only private spaces for each of those functions, we also allowed for that opportunity along the corridor so that there was an opportunity for group shaving or just showering or cleaning. But it became this sort of truly a welcoming, warming center in this transition space. And then it still opened up into the lovely room, which became the gathering space for food and other activities. The connection between the church and the chapel became simply a transition space for handicap accessibility. And again, finishes and became more appealing. And one of the members of the staff would always say, I want it warm, want it to feel warm. Don't want it to feel necessarily like it's a chapel or with marble and terrazzo floors and plaster ceilings. So all of the materials were very, very carefully selected to accommodate that wish. The kitchen, we were limited on space for the kitchen, so it's still we were able to expand it. And again, crazy stuff you do, but there's an elevator that links the floors of the building. That elevator equipment sat right here, and to enable an extra 10 square feet in that kitchen, we relocated the elevator equipment just to accommodate a little larger kitchen. But like your kitchen island, right? People have kitchen, you have your in your homes, right? So this element that you see here in this picture is sort of like our extension of an island in your home kitchen. The serving area where people would gather and serve food in buffet style, or in whatever activity was happening with the parish. But it was very intentional that we extended a portion of this out into this lovely room space. We call it a buffet in this drawing, but think of it more like your kitchen island, where in our home lives, it's really become the center of lifestyle for many people, many families to gather at holidays and other events around that island. And that became very symbolic in that gesture. Laundry facilities expanded, and then also a larger food storage prep, or excuse me, food storage, cold food storage, so that there's a lot of donations for food, and that was what this space was really provided. The relocation of the law school was integral, and that was another project my firm was involved with. And again, how fate works out, or the domino effect of certain decisions. But the law school ultimately relocated to a building across the street, which was an old fire station that we adapted for them, and allowed the second floor mezzanine space to become offices as well as healthcare spaces for dental, foot hygiene, mental health, law advice. So this mezzanine really became a multi-function space for those secondary services. Well, secondary, still important, but not the primary day function of food and shelter, but all those personal cleaning and health needs, as well as a large conference room that overlooked the space below. Now, the following are just a series of images of the existing spaces and how you can see that the church culture and life is all integrated. As I mentioned before, from the Depression on, outreach to the homeless has always been an important role in this parish. And it wasn't until the late 80s where it became the warming center became a public outreach and space. But as members still continue to join or have been part of this parish for so many years, they understand that it's an integral part of the mission and purpose of the parish. So, for example, during COVID and other very extreme cold times, the sanctuary space itself becomes space for homeless to gather. So I'm showing these side-by-side pictures of what your typical traditional expectation of the church space. It's Christmas, it's warm, it's inviting, but at the same time, we know that that space can function for the homeless as well, or the guests, excuse me. A lovely room in its final phase, where you can see the, just sort of open and clean. You can see that space the kitchen beyond, what I call the island or the buffet that reaches out into the space where the guests are greeted with food. To the right in this image, you can see that side entry for the parish and staff. In this lower image, and you can also see the brightness of the space. So there was some work done on the windows and brighten things up, colors of paint, et cetera, et cetera. But the image on the left is used by the guests. So it's a very high traffic day, and there's seating and a line waiting for food to be served at the island. The space I called the meeting room, which was also sort of the day sleeping area. In this image, it's set up for presentations. They host AA meetings and a variety of other that is separate from the warming center itself. But this room really takes on a multi-purpose function. And now it's more populated on weekends or at parish events by children in that particular component of the parish. Through the glass, you can see the bathroom core with the doors for the bathrooms and showers, as well as the sinks for shaving along the hallway. This is the upper mezzanine meeting room. So you can, again, a photo, kind of just a clean architectural photo, and then a photo being in use. And this is if one of the previous slides had a big green folding partition in this location, and we removed that green partition and kind of put in this wall of glass that's really reflective of the exterior windows. But again, the intent was to integrate these spaces between the lower level, which is the main floor of the chapel and warming center, and these upper spaces, which were part of the service providers, foot wash or cleaning, dental, and law. And these are just some general overall photographs within the space. It's hard to tell from the photographs, but there's a lot of thought went into integration of windows and natural light on the upper balcony so that there was both privacy from a visual standpoint, but light and natural light and sort of this extension between spaces was really considered. St. Catherine's Chapel entry on St. Antoine Street. A view from the mezzanine, just a daily activity of space. And then that island that I talk about where food is served. Oops. Parish activities. for a short period of time, it's only been in maybe the last 3 or 4 years where I've observed on social media through St. Peter and Paul, as well as the Pope Francis Center, that the and maybe COVID had something to do with it, but it's great to see that this space is being activated by the way it was intended for the multiple users, different use groups, church life, meaning the parishioners and children and families, the groups of homeless throughout the week with the warming center, as well as the staff. So just a quick list of some of the direct impact increase over the last 13, 14 years, or 10 years, 2013, 10 years. Increase from 70 to 100 guests and from between 100 to 200 meals per day. The size of the kitchen and the cold storage area is now enabled nutritious meals to be prepared instead of brought in. Because of the expanded shower facilities, up to 3 times as many of showers per day. Ability to provide clinic services, nursing, pediatrics, caseworkers, dentists, legal, and hair cutting. Hygiene product distribution from once per day, 1 day per month, to 6 days per week. So again, storage facilities. I didn't mention it, but we built in space at the upper level that accommodated so much more additional storage. That was not, I didn't get into it on the plan, but I did mention the relocation of the elevator equipment to the 2nd floor, but I didn't mention all the storage that was created as well. Comfort and security for female guests, and the new air conditioning that was part of the infrastructure project allowed for cooling during summer months. Indirect impact, these are things that people didn't anticipate. Increase in staff from 2 to 7. The desire for parish socials, I could have predicted the increase of parish socials, but increase of parish socials from once a month to weekly, and parish dinners, funerals, weddings, etc. have all increased because of that. New parishioners, parishes growing. And then what I mentioned previously, the 40-unit transitional housing, which is under construction now, which will support the existing warming center and will not detract. It's not a close neighbor to St. Peter and Paul's. It's actually will be built in a different neighborhood of downtown, just outside of downtown, so that it's just expanding the services available. And then real quick, and somewhat a little bit less of a impact, but very different story. Loyola High School, as I mentioned, is an all-boys school on the northwest side. It was established about 25 years ago. Oops, you know what? I left the history. I still have some of, I just noticed this. The only thing that's correct here is the all-boys school established in 1996. Everything else is still from St. Peter and Paul's. Sorry about that. Gilbert, you didn't catch that. So this is the overall campus plan for Loyola High School. The overall campus is in a residential neighborhood surrounded by single-family homes. Fenkel Street has a series of commercial buildings, but is not a particularly populated area. And although Loyola is a member of the community, majority of their students come from outside the neighborhood that the school is within. The There was a gymnasium, a high school, and the two components that we are adding in this project are the chapel and a front entry space. The food pantry is activated, is access from a side entry, and is also an active participant of the church space itself. The church space is organized to seat 200 seats. The blue space is the food pantry, has a separate entry along the west axis of the building, but it still enters, although it's in a somewhat private entry vestibule, it is still a primary component of the church and sanctuary space, so that when the food pantry is active, 99% of the time, the chapel space will be empty by students. So the decision to integrate the food pantry nearest the sacristy, the altar, and the worship space was intentional. By locating it somewhere near the main front entry, would have separated it from the celebratory space, and it would have just been left as a sort of function of the building and not necessarily an active component of the program. And so last but not least, sort of the interior rendering of the new chapel space and the new entry for the food pantry is sort of back in this corner behind the crucifix, so that there'd be a visual understanding from the audience as well as from the guests arriving and experiencing the chapel. Thank you.
What a fascinating presentation you gave.
Thank you.
It immediately comes to mind, thinking if you're going to be building a new building and you're in an area where there would be a lot of people with needs like this, does it make sense to just plan parts to the building like this from the beginning?
Yeah, I can go back let me go back to the plan real quick. At one point, the truth be told, many projects right now are facing financial challenges. And this is one of them. At one point in this project, there was a large administrative component in this area of the building. And so unfortunately, we had to cut that back. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, unfortunately, we had to cut it back, but we've made the direct decision that we're not going to build anything in that would prohibit us from filling that gap back in the future. So as much as the food pantry is now kind of a contributing element of this sanctuary, part of the original plan was to have that space incorporated at the front entry, even though there was a connection between the sanctuary and the food pantry itself. So, as faith has it, the downsizing of the space in the front allowed for the relocation of the food pantry to become more integral as an experience. Even though it had been in the front, it still would have been integral. So let's say in 5-10 years, money's, there's financing available and there's an interest in expanding the services. The long-term plan is that the food pantry can be reincorporated into the space that gets built in the front, and this becomes an integral part of the chapel space. But in this location where the wall is dark is an opening that would happen between the food pantry and the chapel space.
Maybe let me just offer a point of clarification. This is functioning a dual function. One is that it's the school's chapel, but it also functions as a parish church during the week. And so this congregation actually uses the space on a Sunday. And that's where the food pantry operation is actually based in the parish, more so than for the high school. But it's servicing the same kind of population group because it's a very depressed neighborhood where this is at, but frankly, food pantries are almost in every parish, even in suburban parishes now, because food insecurity has grown so much. And the other thing I'll say, I find it very kind of beautiful that it's actually, that was supposed to be a chapel for the Blessed Sacrament, and before it turned into the food pantry during value engineering. But I think there's something quite poetic about this. And originally the view would have been into the space from the sanctuary, so that you would see the tabernacle as a piece. But it would be very interesting that what they see is actually a food pantry beyond the tabernacle, as a reminder of what it means to have this kind of social gospel. Though I don't think our current archbishop would approve that, so we're kind of limiting that aspect of it. So just that point of clarification.
Thank you.
If
I have
any-
a question about the first place.
Yep.
And because, well, I have two questions. One is, does the parish use the downstairs, the lovely room, in addition to the people that are there? Or are the people not there on Sundays? It looks like the same space.
Yeah, I do not believe the spaces, it's been a while, but I believe that there's definitely a separation between when the space is used by the parish and when it's used by the warming center.
Yeah, so correct. On Sundays, the Pope Francis Center part doesn't work anymore. It's just on a Saturday through from Monday through Saturday. Then it's working as the Pope Francis Center, and the parish still functions for daily mass, but the lovely room is not used. But then for Sunday celebrations, then that same space is being used, as well as the children's liturgy of the word is used in that area. That's also kind of a sleeping area for the homeless. So, when you're in there, you could tell that the space kind of has this kind of double function, but it's so nicely appointed that it really works well for both groups. And you do get a fair number of the homeless that also come back for the mass, or they'll come back at least for the social.
Now, that was my next question, is there, because the parish is so involved in this work, is there a flow that, like, the guests are welcome to prayer services up above in the chapel itself? Or, I mean, is there a connection there, or are they not encouraged to go to mass or go to prayer services?
They're encouraged. I mean, they're welcomed, but they're not. I wouldn't say that they're encouraged to go. In other words, they don't need to go to service to get service.
Oh, no, I don't mean it that way. I just mean,
okay.
do they feel welcome in this space that extends to what's happening up above?
Yeah, well, it's all on the same level. So
okay.
the big church is just right
that's right.
adjacent to the space. But yeah, when I presided there are homeless that come. But I'll say the parish now has taken off more because more people are moving downtown. So this is also one of the big wedding factories for the city. So you have a lot of very wealthy families that come and use the space. And I will say that the number of homeless that show up at these tend to be less and less, has been my experience, in contrast to a growing population that's now coming there. But even, very few people come through those front doors where the homeless tend to sleep. And so we do have problems with trying to keep that cleared because of emergencies, so that people can get through those doors in an emergency. But the homeless will also kind of still populate the front of the church area. So I don't know if that answers it fully, but I've noticed that it seems to be less. There used to be a lot more homeless that came to mass, or at least came to the service. Whether or not they participated was different, but it also got them out of the cold weather, especially in the wintertime, or the hot weather in the summertime.
My other question is that, because it's so nicely appointed with the tables and everything, is the clientele the same, where that they build community downstairs, or is it just come and eat and leave kind of thing, you know, where you're not talking to each other? Any clues to that?
I'll say, to be honest with you, I've never been a volunteer at the Pope Francis Center. There's so many students and folks that come and do it, so it's really hard to actually get a slot in there. But I've always heard that there is this kind of a sense of community, and they also police each other that way, in a way that I think the former spot didn't have as much. So people take care of it. So they do have to shut down if there's like an overdose that's occurring in the building, or if there's been some kind of a violence that happens, then they have to shut it down for a day. So the people know that if people start messing up in there, they're going to lose it at least for a day. So people, I think it does build a community in a way that the other space could never really achieve. And for people that are self-isolate just because of the nature of the disease, that, you know, the mental illness that gets thrown upon the homeless as they're living in this kind of situation, it becomes helpful to have these kind of more social spaces. So it's a little more harder for some of them to engage early on into it.
One thing we've, on a number of projects, including the warming center, and working downtown, what we've learned working downtown, Christ Church Detroit, which is maybe half-mile from here, is a similar outreach in terms of ChristNet is a local organization or regional organization that provides day shelter in centers and outreach to the parishes in the evening. And so one thing we've learned over time is that, again, these preconceived notions is that you have to fence everything off. You have to put bars and gates. You have to protect the building. That just tends to invite more wrong or more bad than good. And so, including the warming center, Christ Church Detroit was a great example where the push by the parish was we gotta fence this off. We can't let them here, we can't let the guests or let it happen. And we convinced them to break down those walls, break down those gates, break down the fences. And I've never heard of an instance where glass has been broken or any sort of break-in, and similarly here in this fashion. So I tend to want to honor and respect the space and show it, and in turn, I think the guests and the users treat it treat it that way as well.
I think that's really important because it's their space. They want it to be nice for each other. Yeah.
Loyola, I could say the same thing. I had that same exact conversation with Loyola. They wanted to fence off the whole front end. It happens almost on every project because the preconceived idea is that we've got to fence this off. We got to protect ourselves. We got to, and well, it's kind of a double-edged sword because in today's world, schools and stuff are open for a lot of other issues and concerns that we have to address now. But from the general public, putting up those walls, you're kind of doing the opposite of trying to be engaged in your community.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Tom, for this
You're welcome.
fabulous presentation today.
You're welcome. Thank you. I enjoy doing it.